Nicole Young here with another episode of Perfect Inspiration. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I use Lightroom to go in and out of the Perfect Photo Suite. Now, Lightroom is something that I use literally every single day in my job. So being able to work directly from Lightroom makes it so much easier than having to export the files and then open them up in the Perfect Photo Suite and then import them back into Lightroom to maintain that file structure and all that organization that Lightroom offers. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I have some images here in a collection that I've kind of saved aside specifically for this tutorial, but also because I actually want to process them and work on them and make them a beautiful print. And for this specific episode, I'm going to just focus on a few of them. I'm going to go ahead and go up to these top two on the right. I'm going to highlight them and then click the N key, and that kind of puts you in like a preview mode so I can just look at these two. And the tab just kind of hid those two side panels on the right and left. Now, the reason that I want to work on these two images, and I'm not going to work on them separately, I'm going to combine them together to create one ultimate file. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that, well, you don't really have to look too closely, I guess, but you'll see that this one is a lot more bright, but the water is a little choppier than the one on the right. I used an ND filter, which is a very thick piece of glass that you put in front of your lens when you're photographing really whatever. But in most cases, I'm going to use it for waterfalls or streams, or maybe even to blur clouds or things along those lines. And out here in the Pacific Northwest, there are a lot of waterfalls. And so using an ND filter adds this really beautiful effect to the water because you can keep your shutter open for literally minutes and minutes. But the downside to that is that while the water looks great, sometimes it underexposes the rest of the photograph, as you can obviously see here over here on the right. There's a lot of dark areas. Now I could go in and add some brightness to that just by using the sliders here in Lightroom, but doing that usually is going to add artifacts, or it's going to look a lot more grainy. So what I like to do is I like to create two different exposures. The one on the left here is kind of an overexposure of the overall scene, but the one on the right, is just going to be focusing on the water. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to combine these two together. So I pull the beautiful water from the photo on the right and then the brighter areas on the left to create one image. But before I jump into perfect layers to do that, first I'm going to do a little bit of editing inside of Lightroom. I'm going to hit the escape key to get out of that, and I'll just go ahead and start with this image on the left. I'm going to hit D to go to the develop module. So basically for this one, now it is a little too bright. If I zoom in, you can see that it's in focus, but it has a little too much brightness added to it. So I'm going to just do some adjustments here. I'm going to, let's go ahead and reduce the exposure. And I'll play around with my highlights and my whites and see if that helps. Maybe keep that contrast up. And I'm going to see what I got. Okay, so that helped. That brought some of the essence of that moss back. It was a little overexposed to begin with. And another thing I'm going to do, I'm going to compare it real quickly to the other image. Let me bring this up just a little bit. You got to be careful when you're working with water images because you don't want to overexpose the water. I'm going to hit J just to make sure. So you can see right up there, it's starting, if I were to move this to the right, I would start to get other areas that were being overexposed. So I want to make sure that I'm not going to be overexposing that water. So I'm going to kind of play around with the highlights there too. That white. Okay. So I just added a tiny bit of that brightness back into the water. One thing about using ND filters though is you're usually going to get a white balance shift. If I go back and forth between these two, you can kind of see that it's a little bit more red and warm in this one, and this one's a little bit more cool. So I'm going to balance that out just a little bit. They're not going to be perfect, but it's okay because combining them together, they'll be fine once they're combined. So I think that helps bring it back a little bit. Okay, so I have my images. They're ready to be pushed out of Lightroom. So I'm going to select both images. Then I'm going to go to File, Plugin Extras, Perfect Photo Suite 7. What this is going to do is it's going to open it up right here into layers and as layers so I can do my masking, all of the things that I need to do. All right, so now we're inside of the Perfect Photo Suite. I'm actually going to go ahead and just click right here to hide those textures there on the left because I don't really need those for this image. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit because I like to see my image a little smaller on the screen. Now, if you look over here in the layers panel, we're in perfect layers right now. I have both of those two layers added. I have the image where I'm going to be pulling the water from, and then I have that more bright image, the overexposed version of it below. I actually want this brighter version on top, so I'm just going to click and drag it so that it sits above the other image. So my goal here is to take the bright parts of this layer and blend them in so that way I'm only showing the bright parts of that layer and then only showing the water from the bottom layer. To do that, I'm going to use masking. When you open up a layer instead of perfect layers, you can't see the mask, but there's kind of always a mask happening there. You just have to start masking or invert the mask, which is what we're going to do here for it to show. So because I'm going to only want to show these brighter areas, mostly just the green parts of the image, I need to invert this mask. So I'm going to go up to Mask, Invert Mask. And if you look over here in the Layers panel, you'll see that black mask now in the image. And when you see black in a mask, that means that those parts of the layer are hidden. So in this case, because the entire mask is black, that means that the entire layer is hidden. And to bring that back, I need to paint with white. So I'm going to go over to the toolbar and I'm going to click on that brush tool. Paint in is painting with white and paint out is painting with black. I want to make sure that I'm painting in for this because I'm kind of doing the opposite. Check my settings up here. I usually like to have the feather set all the way to 100. And I'll keep the opacity at 100 for now. And I'm just going to increase my brush size with my right bracket key and start painting. And you can see, mostly in those green areas is where we're really going to see that change. Now, for this particular image, I'm actually going to preview the mask while I'm painting because it's going to make it a lot easier for me to fill in all those little gaps that I need. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here to the bottom left, click on that little box that says All Layers, and go to Mask Red. Now when I paint, I'll basically make that red portion disappear, and my goal is to fill all of that green and paint it so it's no longer red. So, and I'm not going to be super careful with the edges here, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm just going to kind of do some painting. By the way, I'm using a Wacom tablet and a Wacom pen, which is how I'm able to do my painting. You might even be able to hear it through the audio. Makes it a lot easier to work with images like this when you want to do a lot of painting and moving around. Okay, so obviously it looks kind of messy. You can still see some of the white areas. I'm even going to get some up here. So it looks like I did kind of a sloppy job, but there is some rhyme and reason to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back up to my little bar at the top here. I'm going to check that perfect brush. What the perfect brush does is it helps me kind of maintain those boundaries when I'm painting. And I'm going to paint back that red, which is really just hiding more of that layer. And I'm going to kind of paint so I don't have that border with the water. But I need to paint out. So I'm going to hit the X key because that's going to switch. I'll show you once again. Watch that middle of the cursor right there. It toggles it from plus to minus. So I want it to be a minus. Now I'm just going to start painting on the white. And you'll see it kind of knows what I'm wanting to do. It knows I only want to keep that white area painted. And sometimes if you get into a little area where it's not quite getting the right color, just kind of do a little click, click, click. That'll kind of help find those pixels that you need instead of just painting over and over. So I'm just going to keep doing this all around all of these borders. By the way, another thing about the perfect brush that you should keep in mind when you're working is that it has a brush size that goes up to only 500 pixels. So if you need a larger brush, then you're not going to be able to use the perfect brush for that specific thing, or maybe you can find a way to kind of work around it, kind of like I'm doing right here. So we're almost done. And I think that's pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect for this particular image just because I'm blending two images together. I'm not replacing a sky or anything like that. If that were the case, I'd need to get in and really do some detailed masking instead of just the basics that I can do here in perfect layers. However, it is extremely beneficial and very useful to have this type of functionality inside of perfect layers because it prevents me from having to go outside to another product. Okay, so I have my layer as perfectly masked as I can pretty much get at this point in this amount of time. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back to all layers. So now we're seeing the whole composite of everything. And I'm going to toggle on and off. And you can see I really just brought back a lot of that brightness from the greens in all of the moss and the trees. There's still a little bit of area here that I kind of like to see a little bit brighter. So I'm actually going to fix that here inside of perfect layers real quickly. I'm going to go up to layer, new stamped layer, and what this does is it takes the original layers, the existing layers inside of my layers panel, combines them and puts them on their own separate layers. So it's not merging or flattening anything, it's just creating a brand new layer. So now this is a composite of the two layers below. Now I'm going to change the blending mode to lighten. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to change it to screen. That's what I want. And now I'm going to kind of do what I did before. I'm going to add a mask. I'm going to invert it, go up to mask invert. Then I'm going to paint, and I'm going to paint in, and I'll go ahead and paint it 100%. I don't want perfect brush, so I'm going to uncheck that. And I just go ahead and paint in the areas that I want it to be a little bit brighter. I don't think I'm going to keep it at 100% though. I'm going to go in actually and change the opacity of layer here. Okay, so I have that, and it's a little too harsh because I do want some shadow there. So I'm just going to drop the opacity of this layer down a little bit just to kind of subdue it. Okay, so let's go ahead and just toggle real quickly the before, and this is what we started with just that simple image with just the ND filter, and then we added some of that other layer along with some brightness to the image. Okay, so next I'm going to take this into Perfect Effects to kind of finalize and create a finished product and polish it off nicely. And because I'm bringing it into a different product, I want to make sure that I have the layer selected that I want it to edit. And because I have a bunch of edited layers here and masked layers, I need to once again add a new stamped layer. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Stamped Layer. So now this layer is, again, a composite of the three below, and all of the Perfect Effect changes that I apply will apply to the overall image instead of just one individual layer. So I have this layer selected. I'm going to go ahead and click on Effects. Okay, so now we're inside of Perfect Effects, and this is where we get to have some fun. I have some favorites that I've selected over here in this middle column here, and the way you add a favorite is you just toggle this little flag icon, and all of these have little toggled flag icons. If I were to click it again, then it would just remove it from my favorites, and I can keep adding more from the effects section here. So I'm going to start with some of my favorites and see if there's something in here that I can create and stack a whole bunch of effects, and we'll see what we come up with. I'm going to start out with this Magic Forest one. Now as soon as I click it, it's going to apply, and it's going to keep it on that effect stack. So if I were to keep clicking other effects, it would just continually overwrite that. So I'm going to click it, but I'm going to keep it here because I want to make some changes. That effect kind of nuked my greens. It's just a little too surreal for my taste. So I'm going to scale it back a little just by playing with this amount slider, which is kind of the same. It's kind of the equivalent to an opacity slider. So I'm going to take that and slide it down and see what we can do. Okay, so we'll bring it down to about 50% and see what. All right, so that added a nice green. I'm going to bring it down a little bit more because I don't want to go too crazy because I'll probably be adding more and more effects and I don't want it to get too green. Okay, so that kind of turned that moss from a yellowish to a greenish. Now I'm going to click that Add button over here in the effects stack to keep adding more effects. Let me see, I'm going to increase my thumbnail size here so I get a little bit a better preview. And I'm going gonna click on radiance. I kind of like what this thing is doing. Oh, that did a nice job. It added a lot of contrast to the image. And I'm actually gonna play around with my blending options on this because I'm not sure if I want it to be that harsh. Let's see. As you scroll over them, you'll see it kind of changes them so I don't have to actually apply it. I don't think there are going to be any other blending modes I want to work with, so I'm just going to play with my amount slider then and bring it down. I'm going to click apply. And I'm actually going to do a little bit of masking because I don't like what it's doing here in this little mossy rock section. So I'm going to click on that brush tool. I'm going to make sure that I'm painting out. Drop my opacity down. Feather, I like my feather to be at 100. I'm even going to click that perfect brush and we'll see if that'll help. So I'm actually going to bring that opacity back up a little because it was a little too low. And I'm turning off perfect brush just in case it's not quite getting what I want. Okay. Okay, so that's good. Added a nice kind of a contrasty pop to my image. I'm going to click add again because if I were to click on another effect, then it would just overwrite the one that I was working on. Okay, so I don't really see anything here that I want to add, so I'm going to just click on the effects tab and I'm just going to scroll through all of them and let's see what we can find. I'm going to go ahead and click on Brush Cooler, which is a paint in effect, and this means that I really just have to paint in the areas that I want. And you can kind of see if I were to paint the whole thing in, that's what it would look like, but I really just want to focus on the water here. So I'm going to check my settings at the top. I'm going to actually change that to 100%. If I want it any lighter, then I will just change the opacity of the overall layer. And I'm going to actually go to perfect brush on this. Get those edges. I don't like perfect brush for this. I'm going to go out and just paint. I'm just in a hurry here. Okay, again, I'm going to go to that mask red so I can see what I'm painting. It's a little easier sometimes. Back to perfect brush here. Get some of these edges and these corners. All right, and I can also see I've made a lot of little misses. I've missed a lot of spots here. Okay, I'm gonna go back to normal brush. I don't need perfect brush anymore. I'm just gonna kind of fill in the rest. Okay, I think that's going to be good enough for this. Let's go back to the normal preview there. Okay, so I'm just going to toggle that on and off real quickly. I can actually see that I missed a few little spots. But this overall is too blue for me. I don't want it this blue. I just wanted to add a little bit of blue. So I'm going to bring the entire amount down, probably to around, say about 30%. So that really just added a nice, like a tint of blue to the water. I'm going to bring it back up a little bit now that I look at it. So we're getting there. I'm really close to being finished here. I'm going to add and see what else I can add. Now I know in my favorites there's one called Amazing Detail. It's either this or Tonal Contrast that I'm going to want to go with. So let's see what Amazing Detail does. Ooh, that did a nice job. I'm actually going to zoom in pretty close. Sometimes it just takes a second for it to render here. And I'm going to toggle that on and off and see what we're doing at the pixel level. So that's a little harsh, so I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. Just make sure we give a nice little bit of sharpening to that image. Okay, I'm going to zoom back out. do a quick preview toggle by clicking Command P. We can see the before and the after. So I'm really just doing some very subtle adjustments to this just to kind of make it look, just pop a little bit more than it would if it were just the straight out of camera or straight out of a Lightroom image. And just for fun, I'm gonna try one more stack. I'm gonna click on this rich glow over here on the left. I'm guessing I don't want it at 100%, but actually what I want to only affect here is the water. And so I'm going to show you one cool trick that you can do. I already did a mask with the brush cooler effect. So what I can do is I can actually copy this mask and paste it over here on the other one. So I'm going to go up to mask, copy mask. I'm going to click back up here on that rich glow effect and then go to mask, paste mask. So now that effect is only affecting the water, and it's a real kind of a subtle effect. I'm going to check my histogram real quickly to make sure I'm not clipping anything. I don't think I am. Let me see if I toggle that off. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit just to make sure. Go back to the navigator. Okay, so I'm finished with my image. I'm really happy how this has turned out. But before I do anything, I'm going to save my preset. I like to save my own presets after I finish my own processing in Perfect Effects. It's kind of a nice way to go back and re-edit a similar photo with a similar style. So I'm going to go up to Preset, Save Preset. I'm going to call this one Panther Creek because that's where I was. And I'll call just a little landscape. There we go. And create. So now if I want to access that preset later on, I just go over to presets and then click on that folder of presets that I saved my image to. Okay, so I'm finished. I'm going to click the apply button at the bottom. It's finished applying. It brought me back into Perfect Layers because that's where I started. And I'm going to click Save to make sure that I save my entire image. All right, it finished saving. I'm just going to do a Command Q to quit and go out of that. And you can see that it popped up right here inside of Lightroom for me, all ready to go. So now I can go ahead and export. Let's go ahead and I'll do a share of this to Google+. I'll just save it right to my desktop. Do nothing and export. And I'm finished, and I was able to do everything just from bouncing in and out of Lightroom.